wow, this is really happening. It's showtime.
I am a native Dallasite, which is a very rare kind of thing. I think of myself like dinosaurs. They're almost extinct. You don't find them very often. You don't find native Dallasites. And I grew up in Oak Cliff, where I went to high school, elementary school, and actually I even attended college around the Dallas area. I have a bachelor's degree from Dallas Baptist, and I have a doctorate degree from the University of North Texas. I've been a teacher, an assistant principal, a principal, a reading specialist for the Dallas Independent School District. I have been a national consultant, training teachers and students and principals across the United States of America. I have written curriculum with the Texas Education Agency and served on advisory boards, national educational advisory boards regarding how to best teach children and help them learn. So my parents bought this home in the Oak Cliff area, the Cedar Crest area of Dallas back in 1961. And they were excited, and I was a 5-year-old. I had not yet started to school, so all of my education has been in Oak Cliff. The history of race in Dallas is sad, but very interesting. Like most places in the South, when the 1954 Brown versus Topeka court case was decided, and the Supreme Court said that schools had to be desegregated, Dallas soundly resisted. Basically, the mentality was they are not going to be able to tell us that we need to desegregate our schools. So in Dallas, as a southern city, we were definitely very segregated. I remember riding the bus and going downtown with my mom or my dad, and of course my mom had to make that speech before we left. I had a couple of younger sisters. Be sure that you use the restroom and do everything before we get out of the house. Get water and everything. Why? Because we knew that once we were downtown, and no matter which store we chose to spend money in, we would not be allowed to use the restroom, and there would not be any cold water to drink. So we made sure that our excursions out did not require that we took a drink. Even if we traveled on the road, we were not able to stop in restrooms during that time as a little girl. And I didn't understand why. I thought it was like that for everybody. Only as I got older did I understand that it was because we were black, and that is why we couldn't go in the restaurant or in the restroom. Sometimes when we got gas, I was thinking, well, Daddy, can I go to the restroom? And he'd just say, no, you're not gonna go, we're not gonna stop. Later, I learned that we weren't permitted to do that. So our city had the typical history of segregation. So when our family moved in the 60s, white flight didn't have its name, but it actually occurred. And I remember, I lived in the Cedar Crest area, and I remember we would go for a walk, and there were for sale signs in almost every yard as we went down the street. Everybody had a sign, for sale, for sale. And I asked my dad, why are they for sale? And he was like, they don't want to be around us. And I particularly remember one day going for a walk, and we had just moved into our new neighborhood, and there were white families, and I saw a little girl, and I thought, oh wow, that little girl looks like she's my age. She was actually on a tricycle, and she rode it out to the sidewalk where my dad and I were walking, and she actually pointed to us and said, look at the N word, only she said it. Look at it. And she was only, I was 6, she was 6. Her mom was so embarrassed. They had a for sale sign. Her mom ran out and grabbed her up and apologized, and my dad and I smiled. And the next time we came through, that house was vacant. They had moved.
I'm from Oak Cliff. I was born in Oak Cliff in the Hampton, Illinois area, off Brandon Street and Oak Cliff Boulevard. There's a little church where my mother was a kindergarten teacher, and that's where I was raised. From an early age, I recognized that my parents and people like me that were living in Oak Cliff were leaving Oak Cliff, and I knew that because one, my parents moved me out of Oak Cliff to a suburb called Grand Prairie, a suburb of Dallas called Grand Prairie. But I can just recall instances in my childhood where we'd want to go to the mall, and our mall is called Redbird Mall, and they would say, oh, do you mean you want to go to Blackbird Mall? And there was the implicit understanding that this neighborhood was going to be less white and more black, and for some reason that was a thing to change, or they wanted to move. So I understood from a very early age that Oak Cliff was changing, and my family moving out of Oak Cliff is definitely part of that change. So I, as a person and in my professional life, I think the best way to describe me is a public servant. I didn't figure that out until later. I served in the military, and I worked in Washington, D.C. as an advocate for human rights. And I think I just sort of realized that the thing that mattered to me most was service. And in the past couple of years, I've realized that I think the best work that you can do to serve your country, your state, your community is to teach in the neighborhood you came from, especially if you come from Dallas, especially if you come from Oak Cliff. So the choice was pretty easy to me.
I'm thankful that my family is able to kind of internalize this empathy and be able to connect with people that a lot of other members of my race have really done a terrible job at. We're able to coexist with a lot of different cultures and try and understand and even, participate for the most part. And I think that a lot of that acceptance is kind of what kept us here. But beyond that, we ourselves were not necessarily the most wealthy. We weren't really able to move on a whim. The house that we are currently living in, we've been living in for the past 50 years at this point. So, we don't really up and move on being able to.
Well, first and foremost, I wouldn't be where I am without my ancestors who came before me, and I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now if they were not continuing to, pave the way for me. My grandfather, both of my grandfathers, Eugene Torrance and Elijah Benson, were both business owners. Eugene Torrance owned a pharmacy. He operated a pharmacy. And my other grandfather, Elijah Benson, ran a convenience store. And both of my grandmothers, are strong women that were supportive of them. One of them, my granny, Algerie, she worked at a Head Start. in Oak Cliff as well, and I was, being able to go up to Head Start with her as a kid and meet all the kids there, and she was able to teach me. I remember one thing that she taught me the hokey pokey. That was some really good times for us. And then my other granny, Margaret Benson, she's from 10th Street, Freedmanstown here in Dallas. Her original last name is Cox, and there's a lot of Coxes that come from that area, the 10th Street area. And I'm forever grateful for the history that she shared with me. Forever grateful for the encouragement that she always gave me, and always, making me believe in myself and letting me know my reality and how to move. So my family, it's an Oak Cliff story. My mom and dad both from Singing Hills. My mom grew up on wagon wheels. My dad grew up on Lazy River. They met at R.L. Thornton, and they had me, and I'm born and raised in Glendale. So it's like, just the Oak Cliff story through and through.
My name is Rafael Trejo, and I am a supervisor at USIC Infrastructure Company. I was 5 years old when I was smuggled into this country. It was definitely a struggle getting past through all that. I remember crossing the border. We had what they call a coyote. He's the one that leads the pack. So the coyote just abandoned us, and he swam back because it was raining, it was hailing, it was cold. The river level had increased significantly high, so he didn't want to risk their lives, so he just abandoned us. And we were in the middle of the woods, and pitch black, couldn't see anything. So my father just started walking with my mother, my brother and myself. We just started walking. We got to this high elevation of where we were at, and from there we were able to see a light, colorful lights. We walked towards those lights, and when we get there, there was nothing there. But from there we were able to see another bright light. We walked to that bright light, and I remember this whole time it was raining, it was hailing, our clothes are soaked wet. I remember asking my mom, like, are we gonna die? Luckily, we walked to that bright white light. It's almost like a ranch. He has his farm. And we get there. As soon as we get there, we see the homeowner pulling up to the house. And I remember specifically, he had a black Explorer. And my dad, he asked him, like, hey, can you at least take my kids in? When we went inside, they had food ready for us. They had clothes for us. They had the water already running for us so we can shower. The reason why we left Mexico was because the state that we're from is called Michoacan, and it was getting really bad with the cartels, with the drugs, the crime. So my father did not want us growing up in that environment. So he decided he wanted a better opportunity for his kids, and that's why we decided to come to America. My first thoughts when I got here to Oak Cliff, it had been the McDonald's that we went to. I remember thinking, this sandwich is disgusting. I was so used to beans and rice and tortillas, and so when we got here, I mean, I liked it. I mean, I was a kid. I would see bikes. I had my friends that we had at the apartments we were living at, and yeah, that was my first experience. Growing up as an undocumented student was tough. We had to definitely just kind of hide behind the shades, and we had a lot of fear. It was an endless fear that every day you go into school not knowing if you're gonna get deported, not knowing if immigration was gonna go in there and take you and then lead you to your parents' house and take your whole family. Some parents wouldn't even pick up their kids. They'll let them walk home because they were afraid to get deported. Growing up, being undocumented, you have so many obstacles. Starting with not knowing what your future is gonna be for you. Are you gonna be working in the construction just like your uncle? Or, what's the whole purpose of you going to school if you're gonna end up like that? And is this really, you ask yourself all these questions and you just get so confused, depressed, anxiety, all these things taking effect to you. So first, I had been offered a job at 16. I know you can get your driver's license at 16, and I really wanted to go down that route, but my parents, that's when I looked into it. My parents told me I couldn't because I did not have any documents. I searched into it, they were right. There's no way for me to get my driver's license. So you just feel less. You feel less than everybody else. You feel like a door just shut in your face when the opportunity is right there, but you just can't because you don't have the proper documents. You see some of your friends that start going into college and universities, and you just look at them through Facebook, through social media, and you wish you would have had that opportunity also, but just because you're missing a piece of paper, a certain numbers that go into your name, Social Security, you can't go down that route. It's the worst. You feel like it's a slap to the face. You feel so degraded, so just less of a person. When I realized I couldn't be successful through traditional ways, I had to hustle. I had to find my own ways. I would get online, I'll find bargain deals with either stereos, wheels, cars, and I would flip it. And that's how I would bring in my little bit of extra money that I would just invest my money. So when I was finally able to get a job through these other steps, before I was a citizen, I had to, it was just even though you get limited from so many jobs, you have to take the minimum, and taking that, even though you're getting paid the minimum, it was still a satisfaction feeling that you had a job. And it was just something that so many people take for granted that I loved it, I enjoyed it. I believe that society these days have a wrong stereotype on us, that we are rapists, thieves, killers. Not all of us are like that. We come to work here hard for our money, and we want to make things right. The system gives us the runaround, and there's not a right way to come in here.
Katrina grows into a Category 4 hurricane. A few hours later, it reaches Category 5, the highest possible rating. Winds exceed 175 miles an hour. All residents in New Orleans are ordered to evacuate. For those without the means to leave, the city sets up shelters.
Seeing those images was absolutely overwhelming. Now you see the destruction on TV, but when you go back and you sneak into the city and you see the desolation, it takes you to a whole nother level. When you see that nobody is responding, nobody cares, when you see the people on the rooftops and they are using everything they have in their home, sheets, towels, to get attention to themselves, and people are scouring over to get footage for the news, but not stopping by to assist them, you know that you are the forgotten city. you know then that you are the forgotten people. And to feel that, I've never had that feeling ever again, and I'm thankful for that, but that will always be a time, a moment in time that will paralyze me. When I came to Dallas, it was even worse treatment because I felt like every time I opened my mouth and people could hear my accent, they automatically assumed I was uneducated, I was ignorant, I was dumb. I think we have to make sure that people understand the different layers of trauma that are in communities like 75216. Most people think of the trauma of parents being incarcerated. They think about the trauma of the inability to locate employment. They think about the trauma of the crime rates, the bullets that you hear at night flying over your heads. They think about the trauma of food deserts and not having access to healthy foods. But nobody thinks about the trauma of students who actually have to bury their classmates. That's a trauma that is so unique, and people don't take the time to really deep dive into that. So with all of those other issues that we have with our students, we also have to deal with the fact that some of these students will not be with us at the end of the year because the community itself is set up to fail these students. So in my career, 14 years in education, I have buried more than 20 students in this zip code. And when you see the casket close on a student, from a teacher perspective, from a mother perspective, that makes you infuriated, but it also tells you you have so much work to do because you never want to be in that church, in that funeral home, in that black suit ever again. And so when we talk about trauma, it is so multi-layered that we have to make sure that there is an understanding of the dire need for wraparound services in these types of communities. We need medical care, we need mental health care, and we need that care to be very accessible to these students and to these parents, because the trauma alone of being a black student, being a black person in an impoverished area has already inundated the students here. And when you put on top of that trauma the fact that students that you have played with since elementary are now on the front of a t-shirt or a funeral program, it makes you understand that there is so much work that needs to be done here, and we need to get ourselves together as a country and work with the teachers and community leaders in these impoverished areas to create viable solutions that will ensure student success, because that's the only way to eradicate any of these racial systems that stifle us today.
You know, that's why I always, whenever I talk about the community, I bring in resilience, because for teachers to show up in a building when they know that they lost a student to murder and still have to try to get metrics of test scores and get metrics of attendance or whatever it may be, it's like, man, that's a powerful individual. And I wish that, you know, that was something that we could just extract and bottle up and have it in storage for us whenever we really need it. But the power of our community has been really helpful in helping move people through those times.
Well, a not so good experience in Royalcrest Apartments was when I was about 10, they had a shootout. And it's like, that's kind of scary. And I stayed more of in the middle of the apartments at the time. So when they was shooting, it was right by my door. My mom, she was kind of scared. My pops wasn't at home, he was at work, so we really didn't have nobody to defend us. I couldn't do anything, I was too young. Losing my best friend was kind of hard. I was in class around like in the morning time, and my cousin texted me. He was like, "Did you know Mario died?" And I was like, "No, he didn't. You know, don't talk like that." And I went to the news on my phone, and it was like a 16-year-old boy got shot trying to rob a pizza man. And I was like, nah, that's not true. That's not it. That's not him. And by going through the day, it's just me, and I'm thinking everybody else knew before me, and they was in like a room, like, I guess, you know, weeping, crying and things like that. But I guess I kind of took it more of a personal level because I was by myself.
it wasn't nobody around to talk to or whoever grew up with me. So I took it kind of hard. And I guess Miss Mason, she came in clutch. She took me out of my classroom, talked to me, had me do something I liked, and kind of like took my mind off of it. Mr. Torrance, he called me at the exact same time, like when I was in Miss Mason's room. He asked me if I was okay, do I need to come get out of school or anything like that. I was like, I really don't know. I was just lost for words. I didn't really know what to do.
You really don't see the bad of it until you get a little older. Once you get into 5th grade, 6th grade, that's when you start seeing the crime. You hear the gunshots, you hear students getting shot. 6th graders that got shot, lost their lives. It was tough when you see those kind of things, and you just wonder if you're gonna be the next victim. Just people getting shot for no reason. Some of the temptations that I had to avoid growing up in Oak Cliff was definitely the gang affiliation, the drugs, skipping school, just hanging out with the wrong crowds and following the wrong footsteps. I remember when I began middle school, 7th grade, that's when I started hearing about these gangs around our neighborhoods. And you have your group of friends that don't like other group of friends in school, and these guys are already gang affiliated. And they would have their neighborhoods divided. If you live on this side of the neighborhood, you belong to this certain gang. If you live on this other side of the neighborhood, you belong to this side of the gang. And it was just so easy to just follow into the wrong footsteps just so you can feel accepted.
So growing up, I grew up in a single parent household where it was just me, my mom, and my brother. My dad wasn't present. He left when I was 7 years old. And throughout that time, we experienced financial hardships where we had to live in a homeless shelter. I remember 3 times experiencing homelessness. One in middle school, one in high school, and then the one that really, it's hard, but we stayed outside. It was me and my mom. And that was extremely hard because we stayed outside the bus stop where I went to school. And my mom, I remember her protecting me because she knew that I believe I was in 11th grade, and she knew that my friends would see me. And so she literally protected me with her body and protected me and put the cover or jacket over my face because she knew she didn't want me to be embarrassed. And that was a lot. And it made me who I am today. And another part of my childhood I remember is having to warm up water in order to take a hot shower. My mom, we struggled financially, but she made sure we had everything that we needed and the things that we wanted. She was like, hey, Ricky and Robert, y'all get those things later. And boiling the water, it was one of those things where we had a gas stove and that's how we took showers. And it was hard, but I believe though when I think and reflect back on it, that's what makes me who I am today. So how that has impacted me as an educator, I teach in the district that I am a product of, and I'm able to be an advocate now. And what that means is I amplify the voices of my students. Currently teaching in a pandemic, it's one of those things where we have shifted our focus on having kids to turn their cameras on. But growing up in a homeless shelter, I couldn't imagine turning my camera on. And I speak on those behalves whenever I'm talking to students and administrators, like we should focus on loving the student versus kind of like these things that we can put off for a while. And so as an educator, I'm able to advocate for my students in different spaces to be able to make sure the holistic student is brought to the table.
Man, Eric Hurt, first and foremost, free Eric Hurt. until it's backwards. I've been, blessed to have a relationship with Eric. Eric's story, he was sent to prison at 17 years old and was given a 35-year sentence. And that was something that I think shook a lot of people in our generation. For Oak Cliff is a space that can be a platform for those individuals. Our zip code lead the state of Texas with the most people in prison, but what do we do for them? Like what outlets is it for them? It's almost like $25 million that is spent just on this zip code alone to incarcerate people in the state prison system. That's a lot of money. Like we just thought about using 10% of that for something else, we could see drastic difference for our community.
Black educators are phenomenal. A lot of times people like to box us and put us in communities like 75216. There's a lot of data that shows that Black teachers improve tremendously the work and education of students of color, Black and brown students. But what we fail to always amplify is that white students learn best from Black teachers as well. The diversity that we bring, the authenticity that we bring to a classroom, white students are able to embrace that and able to find a way to connect to their Black teachers. And so I am one of those teachers who believes in making sure that people understand that we are very multifaceted. I think what people have to recognize is that Black educators teach the students that no one else wants to teach. We entrench ourselves in the communities people wouldn't dare pass through. We have the opportunity to empower the seemingly powerless. We make sure that students realize their potential and their ingenuity, and what's better than that?
It's important to have Black teachers because we are the original teachers, Black people, and that's a fact. You can go look at the history books, maybe not the history books. You can go look at history, right? History will show you where education came from, who were teaching the Greeks and who taught the Romans, right? And a lot of times what we gotta acknowledge is that that's in our DNA as a people. That's in our blood. Those are our ancestors, and those are things that, it's certain things that we call to do sometimes and we don't even understand why. But it was somebody 4, 5, 6 generations before you that was probably the best educator or whatever they were doing. But we've always been educators. And then for our youth now, I think it's really important for them to see themselves in the person that they're learning from. And, I read research about Black teachers not just being good for Black students, but being beneficial for anybody, regardless of the demographic. There were results, there were better results when a person had a Black educator in their life at some point in time. And that's just that's the magic part of it, like that's just us as a people. We grow up teaching each other things, whatever it may be, throughout our whole lives. But today in society, it is really important that we honor the Black educator because they are essential to the growth of this country and have always been essential to the growth of the country and our people. But specifically for Black youth, having a Black teacher is nothing better that they could have in their life. A teacher is somebody that everybody's gonna have at some point. And that's a person that you're gonna spend maybe 8 hours a day with, maybe 2 hours a day with. But if that person is looking like you and they set an example of what you can be and they speaking life into you and they encouraging you, those are the things that are gonna disrupt the narrative that has been put on African American Black people. And it also is gonna propel us to move forward and to be the greatest people that we can be.
So I think what we have to recognize is that Gen Z is the most embracing and inclusive generation that has been born to date. So if you take a white student and you pair that student with an effective black educator, that student is going to grow exponentially. And what you have to do is make sure that you are creating a safe space to dialogue and an authentic space. And you have to make sure that you teach with the integrity and fidelity that you want white teachers to teach black and brown students with. So in my classroom, I have always created a space for my white students, who are usually the minority, to be able to have a voice, to be able to stand with their black and brown classmates, but also to honor their diversity as well, because they are also multifaceted people. I believe in my classroom that we don't paint everybody with the same brush. And so my example has always been that we get to know who the other people are at their cores, and then we work from there. Our learning comes from our ability to embrace each other's cultures and to make sure that we dispel any stereotypes that have been ingrained into our brains, and we learn to look at each other as brothers and sisters in the classroom that can help develop this future.
Black educators are important to dispelling a systematic oppression that has been justified in our system for years. The cultural diversity is integral to dispelling this stereotypes, these racist remarks that have been throughout every single generation. And because of that, I think that trying to color code all of these different people with the same race of teachers and students is just white supremacy trying to take back its control over education. And if you look at it through the lens of trying to break down and look across those cultural barriers and find something that you can connect with on the other side, that is an opportunity to learn, to really learn. And that's something that I think we're taking for granted in education these days.
I am always excited to find talented educators willing to work with our students, particularly in Oak Cliff. And Taylor Toynes, Angelique Brown, my daughter, my son Quentin Seamster, who also is an educator, and there are so many others. I think it's really not just that they bring that they are African American, but you have to have a heart to work with the children of Oak Cliff, and they bring the kind of heart that is necessary. And when I say that, of course, I'm talking about a commitment to the whole child, a belief that that child can and will succeed, not because of some kind of supplemental help. I always say it's not because of it, in spite of.
It's important to diversify the teacher workforce for Black male educators and also Black administrators for non-electives, because I think about Damian Hawkins. He was my last assistant principal, and he was a Black male. In March 2020, I told him I wanted to leave the profession because we began the pandemic and it was extremely hard for me. And Damian, Mr. Hawkins, he said, "Ricky, you can do this." And it reminded me how when I couldn't do something in Jocelyn's class, Miss May's class, she told me I can do it. And so Mr. Hawkins told me, but also his actions followed up. Every week he was like, "Hey, Ricky, how are you doing?" And just how Jocelyn cared about me in and outside of the classroom, also Mr. Hawkins cared about me professionally and personally. And so I think it's extremely important when we think about having Black administrators to be at the table, to talk about equity, to talk about what's important for our Black and brown students, because they bring a unique voice to the table.
My first teaching job, I was teaching in Seagoville High School, and I had, of course, never been anywhere close to a high school like Seagoville High School or in education in general, and I thought I knew it was important until my first assistant principal sat me down and told me what was important. And he was a Black man that was in charge of the science department, and essentially had to rewire me because I didn't think what was important, what is the important thing, and I lacked the perspective that I needed to be successful. And to be quite honest, I just did not understand, and I did not know. So only by, listening to his his very, his very good feedback and very helpful feedback, was I able to, I guess, see what my role was there, what the important, what the thing is that we're trying to do here. And I didn't come with that. I had to learn that. And I'm very, very lucky to have someone like that. And his name is Mr. LaFrance, and he was the AP over the science department at Siegel High School. And he really brought home for me that as a white teacher coming in, teaching science, I wasn't there to save everyone. I was there to serve everyone and have a servant's heart. And when I understood where he was coming from, I felt like I could become a better teacher. And the only ways that I've become a better teacher are not learning new instructional methods or new classroom techniques or new pieces of education software. It has literally been by understanding my students, by talking to black teachers and educators. I don't think you can exist as a white teacher in education without taking a student role to a black teacher. And I don't think that I can teach my black kids without learning first from a black educator. And I don't think I can get clearer than that. I didn't start with the skills, and I'm not, being taught those skills. You have to seek them out, and I think every white teacher has to understand that is part of their duty, I think, in teaching our black kids, is starting first with partnering and learning from a black educator.
This is not a recent problem. In 1954, after the passing of the Brown versus Board of Education ruling from the Supreme Court, there were 82,000 black teachers across the country. After that ruling, the workforce was sliced in half. So we only had 40,000 black educators, even though we knew black students were going into white schools and they needed to see someone who looked like them. The only way for them to be successful was to have someone who understood their culture, which would have prevented discipline issues, which would have prevented students being labeled and placed into special education. And so we look at this problem in 2021 as if it's something that's just been created, but it's a problem that shows us how deep this systemic racism truly goes. Not only did they slice the workforce by half, what they did was they paid women less to work in the field, which totally drove the men out because black men could not take care of their families on a teacher's salary. So now you have black women doing the work at a cheaper rate. Black men are totally gone. And once we become educated, we decide teaching is not for us at all because it is not financially satisfying. So when you have that as a problem, you start to see the tremendous decrease. What we're trying to do now is recruit and retain effective black teachers because they are needed. So what we have to do first is honor and value and affirm black educators on our campuses. We have to make sure that there's a pipeline to leadership for our black educators. And then we need to make sure that there is a special space for accolades and for stipends and any type of financial assistance that will increase the pay for black educators. And then we can start to talk about bringing black educators back into the educational fold. So obstacles that we face, of course, number one, as a first generation graduate, trying to maneuver your way out of poverty, you don't want to take a job that will not allow you to sustain a lifestyle, especially when you have a family. So that's the most prevalent obstacle that comes to mind. Another obstacle that's much more intense is the certification programs and how biased they are for white educators, and they are not culturally responsive to black educators and brown educators, which stifles us from being able to pass the assessments that allow you to receive your certification. And so serving on the State Board for Educator Certification, I am a part of the Education Preparation Program Committee, and we are looking at the testing and what it is that we need to do to address these disparities to ensure that we are making a leveraged playing field for teachers of color to be able to pass the assessments and go into the classrooms where we need them.
Yes. Jocelyn Mays, I call her Miss Mays and I call her Aunt Cake. And Jocelyn Mays, she was the teacher in school where people said, oh, you don't want to take her because she's hard. And I was like, oh, like, why not? Let me see what this is about. So they end up transferring me to her class because she taught honor classes. And this was my 11th grade year. And she taught me math and I was like, oh, she is hard. Like, this is really. And so it's one of those things that she is a person where she cares about you in and outside of the classroom. And I have taken those characteristics that Miss Mays have and applying them to myself. And then as I too reflect back on, she used to pick me up from church every Sunday, and she used to take me to Mama May's house, which is her mom. And we used to eat Sunday dinner, and then she'll take me back home. And then I reflect on it, I was like, Ricky, like, that is like, she gave you nutrition. Like, that is big. And also too, my 11th grade year, going to church with her, I ended up accepting Christ. And so she is who I desire to be as an educator, that care about your students inside of the classroom, where she held me to a high expectation of like, you're gonna get this done and I know what you're capable of. But also this other thing is like, she is still in my life today, that she has never missed a graduation. She has never missed a celebration. She has never missed a turn up. She's always including herself in our spaces. And I'm just so thankful for her and how she has made an impact on my life as an educator. Schools are better because of Black teachers. Systems are better because of Black teachers. And overall, just the education atmosphere is better because of Black teachers. Black teachers have this unique ability to be able to take nothing and make an impact on Black and brown students and all students' education to make it something.
The Black teachers in my life are the man you see today. Without them, I wouldn't be here or there. I'd just be, I guess, nowhere. They brought me from like a seed. I was a flower, and I guess I'm blooming now. Without those Black teachers, I wouldn't be able to speak out. I guess I would be like stage frighted for everything. Cause before that, it was like, I didn't want to talk to nobody, you know? It was more of an in shell, no speaking out, no poems, no movies, none of that. But with them, I was like, they gave me a voice. It's like I had one, but I didn't know how to use it. And they taught me, they gave me the steps, and I guess here I am today.
For me, you know, if I could just think of one key example of liberation in the past 5 years, as I think about my daughter. I think about my daughter, Wednesday Jewel Torrance. I think about the foundation that I've been able to build over these past 5 years for her to be herself, for her to be able to see the world, and for her to be free. And I'm just thankful to God for that, you know. I'm thankful to God to be a free man. You know, my zip code data showed that I had a 50% chance of being incarcerated by being born where I was born. And, you know, to see all of the things that we've done, you know, is unbelievable at times. But I think about also how Fort Oak Cliff, or our responsibility here at Fort Oak Cliff, is now we're a proof of concept for somebody else. I hope that, you know, somebody anywhere across the country that may say, hey, I want to do this, that, and the third in my community, and I want to do it this way. They could point to Fort Oak Cliff and say, if anybody was like a funder or whoever may not have seen that, they don't believe in it, they could point to Fort Oak Cliff and say, nah, it has been done in this way and with this truth. And that's a responsibility that we have as an organization and as a movement that I take to heart, because, you know, yes, we've touched thousands of people in Dallas, but what we're doing here may touch one person that could be, you know, in Southeast DC, that could touch thousands of people in Southeast DC. But we gotta forever think of, you know, how are we improving ourselves every day? And that's what I just tell everybody, you know, liberation to me you can't be liberated without practicing knowledge, wisdom, and understanding in everything that you do. You have to. You gotta believe. You know, when the scriptures say you are fearfully and wonderfully made, people say that and they don't believe it for real. You gotta really believe that. And the most liberating thing to me is to be in a situation up against all odds, right? And you say, you know what, I'm gonna bet on me. I don't care what nobody else say, I don't care what nobody else is thinking. I believe that I've put in the work, that I've done everything that I was supposed to do, researched, moved with the positive intent in everything that I'm doing, and I'm gonna bet on myself and believe in yourself. And that's one of the most free things, most powerful feelings that an individual can have. And I've seen it, and I can attest to it, but it came from prudence, diligence, and a lot of prayer.
If I could reflect back and talk to little Ricky, I would tell him that you are more than what you've been through. That your dad not being present doesn't make you less of a man. That you growing up in a homeless shelter doesn't make you any less of a person. Being called ugly doesn't make you less of a person and less of a student. Being called gay, that doesn't make you less of a person and it doesn't demean your humanity. And when I look back and reflect on those things, I would tell little Ricky that I would look myself dead in the eye and say, you're loved. You're more than what you've experienced, and that your life, you don't know the influence that you will have. And I think that is what I tell myself to this day, is that you're loved. And I think holding on to love is what keeps me.
I hope that we will take the time to see how intricately Black educators prepare, how much they sacrifice to work in these communities and empower the students who look like them and those who don't. And I hope one day we will celebrate Black teachers for all that they give to every student every single day. What I need everybody watching this documentary to understand is that this is a universal theme. The poverty that is found in Oak Cliff, the trauma that the students and the teachers endure, the inability to locate jobs and employment, the food deserts are all a part of Oak Cliff. See, I'm not from Dallas, Oak Cliff, but I am from New Orleans, Oak Cliff. There's a Black teacher in Chicago, Oak Cliff. There's a Black teacher in Compton, Oak Cliff. There's a Black teacher in Detroit, Oak Cliff. Oak Cliff is in every section of this country because Oak Cliff is a state of mind and being that can be found in any impoverished area. That is why we need Black teachers, because Black teachers will go into any Oak Cliff and will get the job done.